This is the moment no one inside the Invictus world expected to become public, and yet it has already sparked one of the most explosive backlashes the organization has ever faced. A massive petition is now circulating with a demand so direct, so ruthless, that it has shocked even longtime supporters of the games. Not a reform, not a review, not a compromise. They are calling for Harry and Meghan to be completely removed from Invictus. And what makes this even more disturbing is who is signing it. Veterans. Not critics of the royal family. Not online trolls. But wounded service members who claim they once believed in the mission until something changed behind the scenes. According to leaked discussions spreading across private forums, tensions have been building for months inside the Invictus community, but everything allegedly reached breaking point after the latest internal decisions tied to the upcoming Birmingham event. Now the question tearing through social media is simple, but explosive. How did a project once praised as Prince Harry's greatest legacy turn into a movement demanding his removal? And why are insiders suddenly warning that this petition might only be the beginning of something much bigger? Because what happens next could change the future of Invictus forever. And the first shocking truth behind the storm is only just beginning to surface. To understand why this petition has detonated such a firestorm, you have to go back to what Invictus was always supposed to represent. When Prince Harry launched the Invictus Games, it was sold to the world as something revolutionary, a global platform where wounded, injured, and recovering service members could rewrite their identity through sport. Not victims, not statistics, but competitors, survivors, champions. For years, that message worked. The early editions were celebrated internationally, with emotional opening ceremonies, royal appearances, and powerful stories of veterans overcoming physical and psychological trauma. Harry was positioned at the center of it all, not as a distant royal, but as a soldier's prince, someone who understood the battlefield beyond ceremony. But behind that carefully crafted image, tensions, according to multiple alleged insiders, never fully disappeared. Whispers began circulating in veteran communities that the structure of Invictus was changing. What started as a tightly focused sporting event was reportedly expanding into a large, complex international operation with rising costs, corporate involvement, and increasingly political undertones. At the same time, Harry and Meghan's public life had shifted dramatically after stepping back from royal duties. Their brand, their media presence, and their global influence became inseparable from every project they touched, including Invictus. And that's where the divide allegedly began. Supporters saw evolution. Critics saw distraction. Within veteran forums and closed discussion groups, some began questioning whether the original mission was still the priority, or whether the organization had become something larger, more commercial, and more centered around image than impact. But nothing truly exploded until the lead-up to the Birmingham Games. According to leaked claims circulating online, internal disagreements over sponsorship structure, funding allocation, and operational control reportedly intensified behind the scenes. These issues were never publicly confirmed, but they became fuel for growing suspicion. Then came the petition. At first, it looked like just another online protest. But within days, it allegedly spread across veteran networks, gaining signatures far beyond what organizers expected. Not because people were rejecting the idea of Invictus itself, but because they were questioning its leadership direction. And that distinction is what makes this story so volatile. Because when a movement built on unity starts producing internal division, it doesn't just create criticism, it creates conflict. And according to emerging chatter from sources close to the situation, what triggered the next phase of this controversy wasn't just disagreement. It was a moment inside the Invictus ecosystem that allegedly made even longtime supporters pause and ask one question. Who is Invictus really serving right now? And once that question entered the conversation, everything began to spiral in a direction no one could control. Because the first major crack in the foundation was about to appear, and it would change the tone of this entire story overnight. The first real explosion didn't happen on a stage, and it didn't happen in a press conference. It happened online. According to circulating screenshots and alleged leaked messages shared in veteran discussion groups, Frustration inside parts of the Invictus community had been building quietly for weeks before the petition ever went public. But one specific claim, whether fully accurate or not, acted like gasoline on a fire already burning underground. The claim suggested that internal decisions around the Birmingham preparations were prioritizing image, sponsorship optics, and high-level branding commitments over direct participant support. Within hours, the conversation shifted from mild criticism to outright outrage. Veterans in these discussions began posting emotional messages describing disappointment, confusion, and a growing sense of disconnection from the organization they once believed in. Some claimed they felt like background figures in a much larger production. Others argued that the original spirit of Invictus, small, personal, mission-driven, had been replaced by something far more corporate. Then came the moment that escalated everything. A screenshot allegedly attributed to a private exchange, never officially verified, began circulating widely. It suggested internal disagreement over how participant funding and travel support were being handled for the upcoming games. Even though the authenticity of the message was immediately disputed, the damage was already done, because perception moved faster than truth. Almost instantly, social media accounts began amplifying the story. Hashtags linked to Invictus started trending in niche circles, with veterans, commentators, and critics all weighing in at the same time. The conversation fractured into two aggressive camps, those defending Harry's mission as misunderstood, and those insisting the structure had become unsustainable and overly centralized. But the real twist came when a separate claim entered the discussion. Allegedly, a group of veteran supporters had begun organizing the petition not as an attack on Invictus itself, but as a pressure tactic aimed specifically at leadership accountability. According to these claims, the goal wasn't destruction, it was forced change at the top. That's when the tone shifted completely, because suddenly this was no longer just criticism. It was organized resistance inside a movement that was supposed to represent unity. And as this narrative spread, another layer of tension emerged, one that made everything even more controversial. Whispers began circulating that internal communications had become unusually defensive, with some supporters allegedly being discouraged from discussing financial concerns publicly. Whether this was a misunderstanding, a misinterpretation, or something more serious, no one could confirm. But the effect was immediate. Trust began to fracture. And just as the situation looked like it might stabilize, a second wave of revelations hit the internet, pushing the entire controversy into a far more dangerous phase, one that would draw attention far beyond veteran communities and into global media speculation. And what surfaced next didn't just escalate the story, it completely changed the direction of the conversation. The moment the controversy left veteran circles and entered mainstream social media, everything changed in tone, speed, and intensity. What had started as a niche petition discussion suddenly became a global talking point, amplified by commentary accounts, reaction channels, and anonymous insider posts that claimed to have deeper access to what was happening inside the Invictus ecosystem. And then came the second wave. A new set of claims began circulating online suggesting that the financial structure behind recent Invictus games had become far more complex than publicly understood. According to these alleged breakdowns, large portions of the budget were not directly flowing into athlete support, but into layered operational and event infrastructure contracts. The numbers being shared were explosive, even if unverified. Cost per participant figures were being reposted across platforms with dramatic commentary, with critics arguing that the scale of spending no longer matched the visible experience of the athletes themselves. Supporters immediately pushed back, calling it misinformation and selective interpretation. But the damage wasn't about accuracy anymore. It was about momentum. At the same time, another claim began spreading, that corporate sponsors were quietly reassessing their involvement ahead of the Birmingham Games. Screenshots of alleged internal emails and speculative posts suggested hesitation among certain partners due to reputational uncertainty surrounding the broader public debate. Within hours, the narrative escalated again. Social media threads turned the situation into a battlefield. One side accused critics of targeting Harry unfairly and weaponizing misinformation. The other side argued that ignoring financial and governance questions was exactly how problems grow unchecked. Then came the celebrity-adjacent commentary cycle. Public figures and commentators began weighing in indirectly, posting vague but loaded statements about accountability in charitable institutions and the importance of transparency in large-scale nonprofit operations. None of these posts named Invictus directly, but audiences immediately connected the dots. And that's where the situation took a sharper turn. Because buried inside the growing noise, a new allegation began circulating, one that suggested internal disagreement wasn't just external criticism anymore. It claimed that within parts of the Invictus ecosystem, there were discussions about restructuring leadership visibility ahead of the Birmingham event to reduce public pressure and redirect attention back to athletes rather than administration. To supporters, this looked like damage control. To critics, it looked like confirmation that the pressure was real. And just as both sides locked into their positions, a new development added fuel to the fire. The petition didn't just continue growing. It reportedly began spreading beyond veteran networks into wider public audiences, transforming from an internal grievance into a global debate about leadership, money, and trust. And at that exact moment, the conversation stopped being just about Invictus as an event and started becoming a question about whether the entire structure surrounding it was entering a point of irreversible tension. Because what came next wasn't just reaction. It was division on a scale nobody in the organization could ignore anymore. By the time the story reached mainstream platforms, the situation had already split into two completely different realities depending on who you asked. On one side, supporters of Prince Harry and the Invictus mission were furious at what they described as a coordinated wave of negativity. They argued that the petition was being amplified out of proportion, that financial figures were being taken out of context, and that the core purpose of Invictus, supporting wounded veterans, was being buried under online speculation. On the other side, critics insisted this wasn't about personal attacks at all. In their view, it was about accountability, structure, and transparency inside a high-profile charitable organization that now operates on a global stage. And social media became the battlefield. Hashtags linked to Invictus began trending across different platforms, but not in a unified direction. Instead, they fractured into competing narratives. Some posts praised Harry for creating a life-changing platform for veterans, sharing emotional clips from past games. Others circulated charts, figures, and alleged breakdowns of funding, demanding answers about how resources were being allocated. And a third wave of commentary focused purely on leadership, arguing that no matter the intent, the structure itself had become too large and too politically exposed. Then came the influencer reaction cycle. Commentary creators began posting rapid response videos dissecting every angle of the controversy. Some defended the games passionately, calling the petition unfair character assassination. Others framed it as a necessary reckoning for large-scale charitable operations tied to celebrity influence. Even veteran voices were divided. Some former participants spoke emotionally about how the games had changed their lives, describing moments of healing, community, and purpose they had never experienced. Elsewhere, others, speaking anonymously, claimed they felt disconnected from the growing public narrative, saying the focus had shifted away from the athletes themselves. Meanwhile, media outlets began cautiously picking up the story, framing it not as a confirmed scandal, but as a growing debate around governance, funding, and perception. That language alone only fueled more speculation online, as users interpreted cautious reporting as indirect confirmation that something significant was unfolding behind the scenes. And then the pressure intensified again. Because according to circulating posts, even within supporter communities, there was growing frustration about how quickly the situation was escalating publicly without clear official clarification from Invictus leadership. That silence became its own talking point. Critics called it avoidance. Supporters called it restraint. Neutral observers called it strategic caution. But in the court of public opinion, silence rarely stays neutral for long. And as reactions continued to build, one final layer of tension emerged, one that suggested this story was no longer just about petitions, numbers, or sponsorships. It was becoming about control of the narrative itself. And once that shift happened, the controversy entered a far more unpredictable phase, where even insiders began warning that the next development could completely change how the entire situation is understood. Just when it looked like the controversy had reached its peak, a new development began circulating online that shifted the entire conversation in a direction nobody was fully prepared for. It started with a series of anonymous posts claiming to come from individuals close to event planning discussions connected to the Birmingham Invictus preparations. At first, these posts looked like typical online noise, vague, emotional, and impossible to verify. But then one detail caught attention. The posts didn't focus on the petition itself anymore. They focused on internal decision-making. According to these circulating claims, there had allegedly been private discussions about adjusting how leadership presence would be positioned during the Birmingham Games, not removing anyone but subtly reshaping visibility so that the focus would remain heavily on athletes and less on organizational figures. On the surface, that sounds like standard event strategy. But critics interpreted it very differently, because in their view, it suggested something more sensitive was happening behind the scenes, an awareness that public perception had become a problem that needed active management. And that's where the narrative took its sharpest turn yet. Almost simultaneously, another wave of posts began circulating claiming that certain sponsors were not just reassessing involvement, but were actively requesting clarity on governance structure and public communication strategy before fully committing to future support. Again, none of this was officially confirmed. But in the digital world, confirmation is no longer required for impact. Perception becomes reality long before official statements arrive. And as these claims spread, attention returned to the petition because now it was no longer just a symbolic protest. It was being framed in some circles as a signal of deeper unrest that had been building for a long time. Then came the detail that reignited everything. A screenshot allegedly showing a private discussion thread began circulating, suggesting that some veteran supporters of Invictus were debating whether the organization had reached a point where structural reform was no longer enough. According to the interpretation shared online, the conversation wasn't just about criticism anymore. It was about whether leadership visibility needed to change entirely for trust to be restored. Within hours, this interpretation exploded across social platforms, with commentators dissecting every angle, every phrase, every implication. Supporters pushed back hard, calling it distortion and speculation. They argued that private discussions were being misrepresented and that the narrative was being intentionally shaped to create controversy where none existed. But critics countered that the sheer volume of overlapping concerns, petition growth, sponsorship uncertainty, public debate, could not simply be ignored as coincidence. And then came the most uncomfortable question of all. If everything is functioning as intended, why is so much of the conversation surrounding Invictus now focused on uncertainty? No official statement answered that question directly, and that silence only deepened the speculation. As the tension escalated, attention shifted to Birmingham itself, the upcoming event now seen not just as another edition of Invictus, but as a defining moment where all of these narratives would collide in real time. Supporters believe it will reaffirm the mission. Critics believe it will expose the cracks. But both sides agree on one thing. When Birmingham begins, it will not just be about sport anymore. It will be about perception, trust, and control of the story itself. And as the countdown continues, one final uncertainty hangs over everything. Will the event silence the criticism or amplify it beyond anything seen before? Because right now, nobody inside or outside the organization can say for sure which direction this is about to go. And now the question is no longer just about Harry, Meghan, or even Invictus itself. It has become something much bigger. A debate about trust, about transparency, about what happens when a global mission grows into a global spotlight and every decision inside it becomes public pressure. So, what do you think is really happening here? Is this petition a genuine reflection of veteran frustration that has been ignored for too long? Or is it a case of online outrage spiraling far beyond what the facts actually support? And more importantly, does Invictus still represent what it originally promised? Or has it evolved into something that no longer feels the same to the people it was built for? Drop your opinion in the comments, because this is one of those stories where every perspective changes the way it's understood. Supporters of Harry will say this is unfair targeting of a meaningful legacy. Critics will say this is exactly the kind of scrutiny large public-facing organizations must face. Both sides are loud. Both sides are emotional. But only one version of events will define how this story is remembered once Birmingham arrives. And if you want the next update as this situation develops, because it is still unfolding, make sure you subscribe, because the next twist in this story might be the one that changes everything again.